fellow Ambazonians. As I come to you at this very moment, a conference aimed at resolving the conflict in our territory is holding in Canada, initiated by the government of La République du Cameroun and facilitated by the Canadian government. An invitation to the conference was directed to the interim government by Canadian government authorities. We appreciate Canada for inviting us, but after much deliberations over it, the entire interim government, that is, including the Restoration Council, resolved that the interim government cannot participate in the conference. Our reasons for staying away from the conference were carefully scrutinized vis-à-vis international recommendations that require a third-party mediated process that zeroes down into the root causes of the conflict. We noted with dismay, however, that unlike in the Bourge-Suisse process that La République du Cameroun walked away from, the role of the Canadians in the ongoing conference does not equal that of a third-party mediator. The Canadian authorities consulted with us barely 3 weeks before this conference. This is contrary to the Swiss mediation spirit and process, whereby Ambazonian and La République du Cameroun leaders were consulted separately but quite ahead of time before making it public. It is also important to note here that Canada seems already agreed on the schedule drawn by La République du Cameroun, ever before due consultation with us. This left us with little insight and input into the conduct and character of the conference. But equally most interesting to observe is the fact that Canada conforms to the fact that Cameroun, ladies and gentlemen, is the one deciding who sits at the table on behalf of Ambazonia and not the Ambazonian people themselves. Expatriates, you will recall, like to lecture us about how we are so divided. Yet in this instance, they are the ones alongside La République du Cameroun trying to foment the divisions among us. The interim government is largely followed and supported by most Ambazonians because it is the only organization in the independence movement set up to have checks and balances to the effect that no one individual, no one person can stand up tomorrow to usurp the government. We have a constitution. We have a legislature founded in the Restoration Council of Ambazonia. And we equally have a judicial council and an ethics commission that is made up of members from our 13 counties. But besides all of this, we have the local government areas, we have the counties, and we also have the regional and country structures through which we administer the prosecution of the war. Because of this unique setup of the interim government, Ambazonians are generally agreed that there is only one interim government, especially given that some former or removed leaders have walked aside and constituted what they now call IGs. In refusing to participate in the Canadian conference, or call it meeting or outreach as La République du Cameroun calls it, we brought to the attention of the Canadian authorities the fact that They and La République du Cameroun seem to be encouraging the so-called division by inviting groups calling themselves IGs, whereas they have been removed from the interim government. We see this in the grand scheme of things for La République du Cameroun not to acknowledge the interim government by the faction so it can easily manipulate any mediation process. We have made it abundantly clear that admitting any other group calling itself IG other than this IG essentially dismisses the originality and uniqueness of this interim government. It equally dismisses whatsoever the structures of this interim government stand for. It makes nonsense the rule of and all that the Restoration Council has done over the years to keep this interim government unique. Giving a stamp of approval to these fractions entails that at any time, anyone can jump out there and form his own thing and call it an IG. Cameroon knows that there is only one legitimate interim government, the one that is backed by the Restoration Council of Ambazonian. Any other fraction arrogating the interim government appellation to itself is a pseudo. But Cameroon wants to maintain the divisions as much as possible because the very idea of the interim government, ladies and gentlemen, means a tacit endorsement of an independent Southern Cameroons. We know that. Acknowledging these pseudo-IGs equally implies that when tomorrow the Restoration Council removes Chris Anu from power, or Chris Anu refuses to stand for election, he can just as well move aside, form or create his own interim government, and you will be invited to Swiss or to Canada to sit there as another IG. If the international community, including the Canadians, wants us to believe that indeed they are so concerned with the divisions, then it is time they participate in storming out pseudo-IGs. We should open our eyes to this. This is La République du Cameroun conspiring to divide us further. Fellow Ambazonians, please do not misunderstand me here. We are not asking any group to dissolve. We are not saying they should be banned either or be ignored. Absolutely not. That is not what I am trying to explain here. It isn't the point. Any group, for as long as it is about a free and independent Ambazonia, should exist and in fact qualify to be invited to any table. But groups trying to usurp the unique character of this interim government without the required structures and checks and balances that make this interim government supported by the overwhelming majority of Ambazonians will never sit in the same conference, never sit in the same conference room with this interim government. That is to suggest that we will have no issues with these other pseudo-IGs renaming themselves different from this interim government. Ladies and gentlemen, we must act with lots of wisdom and caution too in what we do. Imagine a scenario where 4 IGs, so-called, are seated in the same conference room, facing a common enemy purportedly, but disagrees in everything. They cannot speak with one voice, and they are all called IG. We will have played to the agenda of La République du Cameroun. Guess what? La République du Cameroun will go out and tell the world. They will say that the interim government could not agree, isn't it? This is a fact. For as long as we know that La République du Cameroun is behind some of these pseudo-IGs, The pseudos will never agree to agree with us because they do not, ladies and gentlemen, they do not go there to represent you. They go there to represent their paymasters, ladies and gentlemen. We conveyed this line of thought to the Canadian government, and they promised to take it to Cameroon authorities for consideration. The response that came back was that Cameroon authorities want all IGs seated at the conference. We have objected and reminded them that this is promoting anarchy in the struggle and clearly aiding and abetting the divisions that they have all condemned. We have therefore here at the interim government concluded that we will never be a party to any conference in which are seated 4 IGs and which do not agree in that matter. Endorsing anything of the sort is tantamount to saying that the Restoration Council and structures we have built to legitimize this government do not matter. Again, it means that tomorrow I, Chris Anu, can form my own IG from here and just be invited to Canada. Fellow Ambazonians, we must seize this opportunity to end the madness of insubordination, greed, and power mongering in this struggle. We desire to meet at any conference table at any time with our other comrades at the APLM, AGOFC, Morris, Capo, and others, you name the rest, but not with groups usurping the IG. Apart from this sneaky effort at inculcating division amongst us by the organizers of the Canadian conference, one of the fundamental problems with the conference is that it falls short of the internationally prescribed mediation that zeroes down into the root causes of this conflict. The Swiss initiative, as set out, was a good example of what an internationally mediated conflict ought to be. The root causes were on the table. There was a lengthy pre-consultation, ladies and gentlemen, with both parties, La République du Cameroun and Ambazonian. Give and take was expected from both parties. It wasn't Cameroon telling the Swiss to tell Ambazonia what it wants. The Canadian conference falls far short of this. The Canadian conference is essentially a one-way street. Cameroon has decided the agenda, and if we don't like it, too bad, they say. Canadian meeting is more an extension of Cameroon's Grand National Dialogue of 2019. It is taking place in Canada, not so that the root causes be looked into, but so that the diaspora movements have Canada's security guarantees to show up and to endorse the Grand National Dialogue's special status for Anglophones. That is the grand plan. The grand plan La République is taking there. We were unambiguously informed by the Canadian authorities that anything independence cannot be on the table, but that Cameroon is now open to discussing the form of state. We asked what they mean by form of state, and they said the form of state as in one Cameroon, with more powers trickled to the regions. Now, take note of the word regions. They are now ready to talk about federation. That's what the form of state is all about. But what kind of federation? We do not know. Our guess here is at the interim government is that by inviting us to Montreal, they want to treat us to the Canadian or Quebec example. This interim government will not be a party to anything that will not discuss the root causes to this conflict. That has been the internationally prescribed standard, and we stand by it. Consider this, ladies and gentlemen, for a second. The Canadian or Quebec example that they want us to copy, that Cameroun would love to flush down our throats, was subject to a test by the people who would benefit from it. Quebecians were never forced to stay with mainland Canada. They have had two opportunities indeed, at a referendum, to choose to become an independent country of their own. But each time they choose to stay with Canada before rushing to copy from Canada. How about the Canadian government first of all, impress it upon La République du Cameroun the option of a referendum for Ambazonians only, so that just as Quebecians, Ambazonians can decide for themselves what is good for them. How about that? If the Canadians are mere brokers, maybe they should be recommending this to Cameroon and not rushing Ambazonians to a loop-sided conference that does not tackle the root causes of the conflict. It is based on these facts, ladies and gentlemen, that the interim government concludes that if we accept to be in the same room with others who call themselves IGs, we have not only legitimized them, we have also stepped on our message of fostering unity and collaboration within the movement. If we agree to sit on the same table with the pseudo-IGs, we have tactfully legitimized and given them the platform to challenge us on our message of unity and collaboration. Going to Canada would be making a mockery of a refusal to participate in La République du Cameroun's Grand National Dialogue of 2019. The ongoing Canadian conference is simply Grand National Dialogue number 2. And if we refuse to participate in Grand National Dialogue number 1, nothing has changed since then to justify us participating in Grand National Dialogue number 2. Accepting the invitation, ladies and gentlemen, to attend the La République du Cameroun Engineered Canada Outreach Conference will legitimize the attempts by La République du Cameroun to repudiate the internationally endorsed third-party mediation without preconditions to resolve the conflict. Going to Canada will give tacit blessings to attempts by La République du Cameroun to control and to shield itself from accountability for the egregious violations of international law and atrocity crimes it continues to perpetrate on our people with impunity. We cannot do that. Going to Canada will tantamount to dancing on the tombs of our fallen heroes in combat for the restoration of our sovereignty, and a betrayer of the spirit of freedom and the bravery of our own martyrs. Going to Canada, ladies and gentlemen, will give tacit blessings also to a continuation of the genocide on our people and the enslavement of our people and generations yet unborn. The interim government's decision will be revealed when there are affirmed assurances and concrete proof that a third-party mediation to address the root causes without preconditions is on the table, and concrete transparent guarantees of fairness also ensured. Fellow Ambazonians, the interim government calls on the United Nations and the international community generally to take up its responsibility to ensure that the commitment it made to humanity in the preamble of the United Nations Charter is fully respected in the southern Cameroons before the fire of criminality ignited in the southern Cameroons by La République du Cameroun consumed the entire Gulf of Guinea and beyond. In the meantime, the interim government assures Ambazonians of its resolve to intensify the existential armed resistance and defense of the territory and people of Ambazonia. The interim government remains resolutely committed to carrying out reprisal attacks against Cameroon targets and targets supporting or sustaining the enemy's war within the southern Cameroons and the enemy's own territory, referring here to La République du Cameroun. The interim government is committed to action and not empty speeches, conference subterfuges for surrender and perpetual enslavement. This is our commitment. This is our resolve and our stand as far as Canada is concerned.